to see everybody this morning. Got a good crowd with us, and we are so very, very thankful for the presence of each one. To those that are visiting with us, it's great to see you. We're thankful that you've chosen to be here, and we hope that you'll make it a point to come back and to be with us just every time that you do have the opportunity. My family's kind of in a buzz with our latest round of news. As many of you know, our oldest son, Bobby, and his wife, Karita, are in the processes of adopting a baby. And the baby was born on Friday. And if you want pictures, talk to Grandma. She is well equipped with all of that. And as we went through all of this process, of course, still we're dealing with some of the uncertainty that is involved, because the mother does have several days in which she may change her mind. But Lord willing, with everything going as seems to be indicated at this point, come the end of Monday, it will be official that a new grandchild is in our fold, and our family continues to grow. With that having been said, and with this being a topic kind of fresh and deeply important in our thought processes over the last several weeks and months, I want to talk a little bit this morning about the idea of working with children and helping us to understand some of the ways in which we may have an impact on that. It may be in the rearing of our own children. It may be that, as is sometimes mentioned, it kind of takes a village. It takes some helpers sometimes to be able to make everything go as well as you would like. We got a call from our son as they looked at this situation and said, Dad, could you and Mom possibly come out to Arizona and spend some time with us? We haven't actually had a newborn to take care of before, and some moral support would be greatly appreciated. So Tammy and I are leaving first thing in the morning to head out to Arizona for a while to be there, to be of some help to the kids and to meet our new granddaughter. So pitching in and helping, whether it's your own children or whether it's other children that you have a chance to influence, there's an important responsibility. But one of the big issues that I think needs to be explored, and we want to talk about it a little bit this morning and probably conclude it in our lesson this evening, is exactly what is it that parents owe their children. We live in a time when social standards have been swapped around mightily, and often individuals are struggling to understand exactly what is the proper course in marital relationships, in the rearing of children. We have all of the quote experts running around the country telling us how we're supposed to do it, but oftentimes the primary source of instruction, the Word of God, is left totally ignored. Children truly are a wonderful blessing. And when we start thinking about the rearing of children, rearing them correctly is one of the greatest challenges of adulthood, of realizing what we need to do to make the right decisions and to help steer our children in the proper and right way. Over in Psalm 127 and going down to about verse 3 beginning, Solomon says, "Lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them, and they shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate." There are just so many reciprocal blessings, both in working to rear our children properly, and also then the reward that comes back to us as parents, even as we move on through our years in life, as that relationship grows closer and closer and closer. But time and careful planning are needed if we're going to be successful in this task. Oftentimes we can become a slave to this information age that we live in, and we're trying to figure out exactly what day of life they're supposed to take their first step, and if that doesn't happen, it may be the end of the world, and we just can get all wound up about some rather silly things sometimes, because often we don't understand that every child moves to its own timetable, and maturity levels and understanding levels and growth and development is going to vary from one child to another. Even having multiple children in the same household, you're soon going to find they're not alike. They respond differently in different ways. And so we can become very confused as parents as to exactly what am I supposed to do. Because one formula, one set of instructions, one set of rules may or may not be appropriate in every single situation. But I do believe that the Bible serves as the best possible instruction manual to help us understand something about the rearing of children. Now, as we start going through the scriptures, we find references made to some successful parents, to some parents who took the job very seriously and were maybe faced with adversities just as parents are today, but yet their children, shall we say, turned out right. One of the examples that I think of is going over to 1 Timothy chapter 5 and going down to verse 1, where a reference is made here to the upbringing that the young preacher Timothy experienced. Here Paul reflects back on that. He says, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and in thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that is in thee also. These women accomplished the most important task that they were given as parents and grandparents to do. And that was to work toward the saving of the souls of their children. They were deeply involved in helping Timothy understand the importance of spiritual things. It says here that they had an unfeigned faith. It wasn't a faith. It wasn't just going through the motions. It wasn't just putting in the time. But they developed a genuine faith and trust in God. And Timothy got that from the modeling and from the instruction of his mother and his grandmother. You know, she could have been a single parent. We don't know all the details of Timothy's background. But in looking at his situation, it was the instruction of godly parents and grandparents that helped Timothy turn out to be what he was in life. It's interesting as well to think about faithful Abraham back in Genesis chapter 18. On this occasion, God is here, the Lord is mulling over whether to share with Abraham the coming doom that was going to be experienced in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And was this too heavy a load for Abraham to carry? For after all, he had kinfolk living in Sodom. Lot and his children were there. And this was going to be quite a blow to him to understand the coming doom that was going to rest upon that city. But over in Genesis chapter 18 and going down to verse 19, the Lord says, for I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, and the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken of him. See, Abraham's a godly man. Promises were made to him in the opening verses of Genesis chapter 12 of what a great nation he would become, and through him all families of the earth would be blessed. Abraham was a strong supporter of God, a faithful man. And even though this distressing news was going to be shared with him, Abraham was going to be able to handle it. And of course, Abraham sort of bargained with the Lord as to how many could be found. If there's enough righteous souls there, will you save the town? Got it all the way down to 10 souls. But still, there wasn't 10 faithful souls to be found there. And the city of Sodom and Gomorrah went up in smoke. But what we see spotlighted here is the fact that the kids just didn't happen to grow up and develop faithful service to God and live faithfully all the days of their lives. It didn't work that way. It was because there were some parents and grandparents who did everything that they could to nurture spirituality in their offspring. And with all the pressures that we have today to kind of be like everybody else, to be like the Joneses, as the old expression goes, often, we're pressured to the breaking point, to provide for our children and to do what everybody else is doing and to make them popular and to make them conform. And often oftentimes parents are completely befuddled as to what they really do owe their children. There's been a story not too long ago of a parent that was so distressed that their daughter did not get a position as cheerleader that they actually wound up being responsible for killing another girl, hoping that would make a spot for their daughter on the team. Sometimes we can become absolutely obsessed of what we think need to be the stepping stones. We find that there was a big case that's still pending in the courts now of some very wealthy movie star type people who wanted their kids to just go to the best schools. And so they would bribe and pay and do whatever it took to make sure that their children got these particular advantages, whether the children wanted those advantages or not. And now they're in all kinds of legal trouble because of the things that they chose to do. The Bible also helps to understand some cases of some unsuccessful parents. And it's interesting to see some of the ones that are mentioned. One of these is a judge in Israel, a priest of God, a man by the name of Eli. And whenever we look at his life, we find that he was the one that wound up being a mentor to young Samuel. He was a judge in Israel. There are a lot of commendable things that we might say about Eli, but Eli's kids were a royal mess. They took bribes, they were immoral, and God tried to get Eli to see, you need to do something about this, and Eli didn't. In the revelation that God gave to Samuel about what was going to happen to Eli's household, it says in verse 13 of 1 Samuel 3, the Lord said, for I have told him that I will judge his house forever for the iniquity which he knoweth, because his sons made themselves vile, and he restrained them not. As difficult as it was, there were some steps that Eli should have taken to correct the rampant sinfulness that was being experienced by the people through the hands of his own kids. But Eli just, as some would say, it loved them too much to do anything. And God said, this ain't going to cut it. And both of his boys were killed in one day, and Eli himself died. All kinds of things happen whenever we do not enforce and follow the ways of God. But then we think about Samuel himself. Over in 1 Samuel chapter 8, and looking at the first 3 verses there, we find that Samuel himself was not very successful as a parent. Now here he is, a prophet of God. He anointed King Saul. He anointed King David. He is the one who was the rebuker to Saul, to point out his iniquities and all those areas in which he fell short. He was a conscience in Israel. He did what God told him to do. But somehow in the process, when it came to working with his own kids, things didn't turn out so well. Over in 1 Samuel chapter 8, beginning in verse 1, it came to pass when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abiah, and they were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. His boys turned out to make such rotten judges that Israel took advantage of the opportunity to cry out for a king. Learning principles of honesty and integrity, being able to put in some time with the instruction it takes as to what truly is the righteous course for a man to follow, that begins in early childhood and follows all the way through. And the thing that is alarming to me in these 2 cases is that these are men who were very involved in, shall we say, the salvation of others, but they didn't take care of their own household. That's one of the things that's always been heavy on my heart as Tammy and I's work to rear the 3 kids of ours. has been that I've seen too many cases of preachers who spend so much time working with all the brethren that they lost all of their own children because there wasn't time there. I had a young friend of mine, his father was a very, very prominent gospel preacher. And Dad was being called for gospel meetings all over the country. And he was always quick to go help the brethren, which is a laudable, praiseworthy thing. But he said, as a kid growing up, you could never rely on Dad's word. He said that he'd be there to take you to the zoo until somebody called and needed him, and then he was gone. He said he'd be there for your birthday party, but someone scheduled a gospel meeting and he was in some other part of the country. He was going to be there for your graduation, but then somebody else needed him and he was gone again. This young man kind of screamed out for attention as a kid growing up. He was known to be pretty rambunctious and a real problem child. But basically, it was because he was trying to cry out for somebody's attention. No, he got it, but it wasn't the right time. And eventually, he became so disenchanted with the church and with serving God that he left the Lord completely. Things happen. Satan's not going to take a holiday. He is after your children and my children with a vengeance, and that is never going to subside. And so it's our job to constantly be the voice of godliness, the instructor in righteousness, to help children understand exactly what are the most important things in life. So let's look at a few. What do parents owe their children? Well, one of the first things that come to mind is that we do owe them some of our money. Now, that's not to say that we are supposed to be the big piggy bank that just forks out money for any and everything. But as parents, we also assume the responsibility of taking care and providing for our children and providing for all of our family. Over in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and going down to verse 8, the Apostle Paul says, "But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel." Parents are going to be charged with doing the best they can in supplying the necessities of food and clothing, shelter, whatever supplies are needed to help them get through life. Now, unfortunately, what we think that often translates into is that means they've got to have the biggest and the best of every single thing. A 7-year-old does not need a new stereo system. But sometimes, if that's what they think, we go trotting off to the store. I was substitute teaching one day. There was a knock on my classroom door. Had a young girl in the class, and it was her 16th birthday. She was so excited. And she was especially excited when you opened the door and there sat a new bed that Dad was delivering to the school for her to drive home in. At 16. Because his little girl needed to have things covered. Sometimes we don't understand that we can go so overboard on things that folks lose any sense of value and what it takes to really earn that. As our kids were going through school, oftentimes, like our son, I remember in particular, was playing on sports teams, and the basketball team every year would choose what was going to be the team shoe that everybody was going to be wearing on the basketball team that year. Average price was usually about $150 a pair. And this old boy didn't have $150 a pair for shoes. So knowing that was coming, Bobby and I worked out a compromise. I said, I can come up with half, you got to find the other half. And he began working at an early age, finding odd jobs that he could do and other such things. When the day came, he had his money and I had mine. And you know what? We never had to worry about those shoes being left in the gym and forgotten about. You know, it's amazing if you're around the school to go look at what's in the lost and found box. You will find expensive school jackets that parents paid hundreds of dollars for. You will find expensive shoes. You will find designer clothes. You will find all kinds of things that are top dollar items that just got tossed around and not appreciated in the least. A balance must be found between the necessary and the extravagant. And supplying necessities is part of our job as a parent. We may not be able to get the designer label, but we can get decent clothes for the kids. We can see to it that their needs are met. And it should not be something that we gripe about, something that we're all upset about, something that's just such a burden, and now I've got this to do. It's our privilege to be able to provide for them, because in all probability, one day they'll be providing for us in one way or another. It may be in taking care of us, providing services for us, helping us out in some of the adversities that we face in life. But what goes around comes around. And we should be able to make those sacrifices, knowing that one day they'll probably be making those sacrifices for us. It's been said that gratitude paves the child's way. They need to be able to express that gratitude. Be taught to say thank you. Be taught to show appreciation. But there's an old Indian proverb that carries a powerful message with it. It says you give a child everything he wants, and eventually he will ask you for your life. Because that drive and desire is never going to diminish. Give me this and I want more. I had a parent and a member of the church. She loved her kids, did everything she could to take care of those kids. If crawling around the city square on her hands and knees would have made life better for her kids, she'd have started crawling. That's just the kind of mama she was. But the demands never stopped. And then one day the oldest daughter had a boyfriend. And the boyfriend decided to break up with the oldest daughter. And she came to mom with that, and suddenly mom was supposed to fix that up. Mom was supposed to get him back. Mom was supposed to fix that relationship. Bless her heart, mom tried. But she couldn't do it. And guess what? It fractured the relationship between the daughter and mom. What kind of mom is it? Didn't make any difference, all the sacrifices and work mom had put in all those years. But now here was the one other thing that you have not supplied me, and suddenly you're absolutely horrible. So yes, we have a need to supply the necessities for our children without being bitter about doing that. But we also need to be reasonable and use the lessons necessary in teaching how to provide for your family. Something else that parents owe their children is certainly a lot of their time. We get so busy in building our careers and all the demands that are placed upon us that oftentimes children are simply left to grow up, basically on their own, with very little instruction, very little time to sit down and say, what about this, Dad? What about this, Mom? What is, and to find answers to their questions. Instead, they may have to get it from the babysitter, the child care worker, or somebody else, and it just never really and truly rings true, and you can't always bank on the instruction they're given. Over in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, it says, you fathers provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. We have a very small window in which to try and help our children understand what is important in life and how to make good life choices and how to be a success in this life so that heaven can be their home. And in Proverbs chapter 22 and going down to verse 6, Solomon says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That doesn't mean that Satan's ever going to take a holiday. We can do the training, we can do the teaching, and that still doesn't guarantee that they may not choose a spouse that leads them away from the Lord, or in other ways, Satan gets a hook into them. But the chances are greatly reduced if we train up a child in the way he should go. And he may have a span in his life when he is totally irresponsible, sinful, and as far away from God as one might dream of him being. But notice the rest of this verse. If we do the teaching, if we do the training, if we keep on praying, if we keep on trying, when he is old, he will not depart from it. Yes, we may suffer a lot of grief apart, with our children not being as they need to be. But if we've planted the seeds, our prayer is that one day as they move on through changing circumstances in their lives, that one day they'll remember with love and affection how much mom and dad cared and what they tried to do. You know, oftentimes we forget about the importance of the memories. I preach a lot of funerals, and oftentimes the family that's left behind can only hold on to their memories of the time that they spent with mom and dad. Now, what kind of memories are they? And are there memories? Or is their memory always mom and dad going out the door and me just managing, doing my thing? What kind of effort was made to help that family be bonded together? You know, there are literally hundreds of thousands of unwanted children that are born every year because they're unwanted, for folks have other dreams and desires in their lives, and kids are only going to get in their way as they see it. They don't see the biblical principle that we just noticed about how they are a heritage of the Lord. And so we need to pay some attention to that. You know, when kids are little, they can get our attention. If they spoil out enough, they'll get a fresh diaper, or they'll get something to eat, or we'll find out what's wrong, and we'll kind of take care of things. But later it becomes a little more difficult. W.C. Fields was not a kid person. He just didn't think much of kids anyway. He said whenever kids are born, you drill some holes in the box and put them in the box and let them stay in the box until they grow up. And he says that whenever they become teenagers, you plug up the holes in the box. You know, he just was not a very kid-friendly person. You know, and there are some folks that they look at their children all the way through as just being a burden. This is just my burden to bear. How many parents have just rolled their eyes and, oh, it's just so terrible, my children became teenagers. We had a blast without us. We were in the thick of things with them. We traveled with them to all different kinds of competitions. We had some wonderful memory-making time because of the chances that we made to have happen. But it also takes a responsibility to pray for kids, to let them know that they're just not a pain all the time. They do good things. We are proud of them, and we want to encourage them in doing good things. Sometimes we can develop in our marriages and also with our children that very sharp tongue in which about the only thing that comes out is our criticism. It doesn't make any difference of how much that they've done that was right and good and wonderful. It's the one thing that they didn't do that we zero in on. There's a story about Alexander and his horribly, terribly awful day. And it was one of those things, Dad comes in from work and Alexander's sitting on the steps and he's just shaking his head. And he begins to recite all the mistakes he's made that day. All the things that he did that were not right. And how he got fussed at for this, and he got busted for that. And he did this, and he did the other. And he was just having such a terrible day. But a big hug from Dad made it all better. You know, yeah, we can have joined the parade and say, yeah, and you left your bicycle in the driveway too. You know, and we could just add something else onto that list. Rather, instead of realizing there's something there that can be praised, we've got to be able to reach out to the kids and let them know how much we appreciate them, how much we love them, and what a valuable asset they are in our families. But you know that doesn't come automatically. Over in Titus chapter 2, Paul is talking about the teaching process that's handed down from generation to generation. And he says in Titus chapter 2, beginning in verse 3, the aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, and teachers of good things. So the older women have their job to do too, in maturing gracefully and being responsible for all that they can come in contact with. And amongst those duties is in verse 4, that you may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, and to love their children. How do you teach someone to love your kids? Well, you might start out by sharing the fact that it took some work to love you, but I made it. And to help them understand that there are some things you've got to turn loose on. And you look for the good, and you work to eliminate or extinguish that which is not right. To be discreet, chaste, keepers at home, good, obedient to their own husbands, that the word of God be not blasphemed. It's a generational thing. I have so many memories of the things that my grandparents said and did. Oftentimes, those moments of spoiling were greatly appreciated as a young kid growing up, with memories that never ever will fade away. But kids need some time to play. Yeah, they need to be supervised, but let them do their thing to be able to see and understand what life is all about. Be able to open the home so that others can come and to be there and to visit and to have interactions in a supervised kind of way. And also, as parents, we've got to be careful of their associates. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 33, be not deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. Your kids hang with the wrong folks and they're going to pick up those attributes and those habits that are far less than desirable. We've got to help our children understand it's not a shame to be different. Over in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 17 and 18, it talks about our need to come out and be separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive. There are some places our kids don't need to be. There are some things our kids don't need to be doing. There are some things they don't need to see, some things they don't need to hear. But we live in a time when a 12-year-old thinks they're 21. And that they've got all of that wisdom, that they've got all that discretion, that they've got all that judgment, and they're going to be fine. No, they're not. And in the society in which we now live with the dangers that are there, oftentimes they're not perceptive enough to realize some of the dangerous situations that they may put themselves in. There are other things that parents owe their children. And we're going to be talking about some more of these as we go through our lesson this afternoon. But I hope that this helps us to understand the importance of investing ourselves in rearing our children. It's not just something that we take wistfully and playfully and not seriously, and then we wonder someday why our kids are such a grief to us and why there are so many problems. There's lots of things that may account for that. But I can tell you from experience, when you have faithful children who've grown up loving the Lord, have married faithful Christians, are concerned about rearing their grandchildren in the right ways of the Lord, it brings an unspeakable joy. But it all centers back on God and doing His will. And as we'll talk about later, it's important that we as parents have our act together, and that we're being the kind of men and women we need to be. And so this morning, if there's some steps you need to take to make your life right in the sight of God, and if there's some way we can